Welcome back, Book Fiends, to Wicked Good Books, a channel dedicated to books and things book adjacent. My name is Nick, and I'm the host of this channel. What's up, Book Fiends? I have a very special video for you today. This is my very first actual book review on my BookTube channel. I talk a lot about what I read on this channel, what I'm excited about. I do a lot of book reviews on my Goodreads page. I'll put a link down below as far as writing. I'm better at writing than talking about them, I think. But I need to put more book reviews on this channel. I enjoy them. I enjoy the books that I read. I have a lot of things to say about them. But every once in a while, one will stand out to me, and I feel like that's the video I want to do a review for. We'll talk about plot, we're going to talk about what's the vibe, we're going to talk about character and setting, atmosphere, pacing and themes. I'm not going into too much detail because this is a spoiler-free review. So today we're going to be talking about the book Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. I finished this last month in 2020. I started off my December read with it, actually. I did the audiobook, but I also got an arc of it through NetGalley. So I was kind of reading it physically on my e-reader, but also listening to it at work. The audiobook is wonderful. I highly recommend it if you're into that medium over reading, but they're both wonderful. The paperback actually comes out this month, so I'm super excited about it because the hardcover itself doesn't really have much on the actual cloth backing or on the inside flat that makes it worth the price tag, in my personal opinion. I always feel like when I open a hardcover and there's nothing special on the hardcover itself, it always feels like such a wasted potential or wasted material or wasted space. I feel like there's so many cool things you could do with that. But I'll just get off my soapbox about that. Very excited about this book. I can't wait to own the paperback. The cover is gorgeous for the paperback version as well. I don't want to call it literary. It is shelved in the fiction section in most bookstores, which personally, if Dune is and The Expanse is shelved in science fiction, then I feel like Vanished Birds should definitely fit right in there. I'm not really sure why it's in fiction, to be honest with you. It does have a little, I don't want to call it flowery, but it has a little purple prose going on. Things I loved about the plot. Due to drastic environmental change, we see the Earth falling apart through a very unique perspective, who ends up living far beyond the standard lifetime for a human being. Because of this, we see a changing world that stretches across the stars and across generations of people and cultures that find their way and make new homes among the terraformed worlds. Following Captain Amani, we meet the ship's pilot, engineer, mercenary, and doctor, and several others along the way, and they quickly grow on you as Jimenez succeeds in creating depth between the core characters seamlessly. You really get the sense that this group has traveled together for a long time, and they share many stories between each other. I love that the book itself didn't just focus on the character relationships between one another, but also with their relationship with time. Especially in a setting where interstellar travel, cryogenic sleep, and genetic modification is completely normalized. There was also a fair amount of LGBTQ visibility and representation throughout this book that I felt was done really well and not in a way that felt forced or tokenized, which I really appreciated. However, as far as the main plot goes, we follow Nia Amani, the captain of the Debbie, that shuttles cargo to and from a station to a planet or several planets. During their journey, they come across a strange boy who appears to have some sort of strange ability or a strange past. That no one can quite figure out where he came from. He fell from the sky. So they take him on board and bring him back to their station, and then they end up finding themselves in the middle of a intergalactic, I wouldn't even really call it a political scheme or agenda. It's more a much larger conflict than that, but it will quite literally change the way the world in this book works because of this child, this young boy. His name is Aro. And the relationship between Aro and Amani quickly becomes very similar to mother and son. It's really beautiful and very organic, and it feels very genuine. All the characters in this book feel very genuine and organic. They feel very relatable. None of them felt like characters of what you normally see in a science fiction story. I feel like sometimes newer science fiction has a bad habit of falling into tropes, as well as a bad habit of recreating characters that people expect in science fiction. And I felt like all the characters in this story, for me anyway, they just felt very different than anything I've read before, and they talked very realistic, which is something that I find is a big problem for me in book. I don't mind a little bit of cheesiness, especially in my sci-fi and my fantasy. Every once in a while, I'll come across a line or a bit of dialogue where I'm just like, people don't talk like that. And in Vanished Birds, I felt like the conversations, especially the intense ones, the characters spoke their minds and they talk like real people. Which I think is something science fiction in itself can do really well. Now that you have some information on the plot, let's talk about what's the vibe. Reading this book, it just brought me right back to watching Firefly for the first time or playing Mass Effect on the PlayStation. It also reminded me a little bit of The Expanse and Interstellar as far as how the science worked. It was very not necessarily grounded in reality, but it just felt very tangible and very well thought out. And the plot kind of jumps around a lot, which we'll get into that now with pacing and structure. One thing I really loved about this book that I think will be polarizing for some readers is the perspectives and the point of view. Almost every chapter the POV is changing, but you're constantly looking at the main characters through somebody else's eyes or from a different perspective. And sometimes they are like from left field. They just feel like why am I seeing this character from this person's perspective? But it was really interesting because you got to really see the relationships blossom and bloom from a completely different angle, and it made you appreciate the times when you were with them even more, but also learn a little bit about the other characters you're in the heads of as well. I would say it's linear storytelling, but definitely an unconventional narrative in terms of how the POVs are structured and how the book itself is structured. It is beginning, middle, end, but it does have a couple flashback scenes, which are some of my favorite chapters. It takes place on galactic planets and interstellar space you've never heard of, as well as on Earth, in the moon, and on asteroids and space stations. It's pretty vast in terms of the scope of this story and this world they've built. It's not as fleshed out as other reads like Dune or The Expanse, or even recently I read Memory Called Empire, which I loved. But it didn't really have to be. It's a standalone book, which I feel like I should have said earlier. This is a standalone novel by Simon Jimenez. And it's not going to get a sequel, at least not that I know of, and I don't think it definitely doesn't need one. It felt pretty contained, and therefore didn't need crazy amounts of world building, which I really appreciated, to be honest with you. But as far as characters go, super vibrant characters, new and old. Even the bad guys are super vibrant. Even the characters that you hated to love were vibrant. They leapt off the page and just felt larger than life, which I feel like when science fiction is done well, it can kind of put a magnifying glass on what it means to be human despite being in intergalactic space on a flying spaceship flying through wormholes and hyperspace and things of that nature. And it did remind me a little bit of Star Trek, but not as hard sci-fi, or rather not as glossy as Star Trek can seem. It did feel grounded in our reality. Kind of actually gave me a little Battlestar Galactica vibes, which I haven't really read a lot of books that have given me that same feeling. But honestly, it really stood out on its own. It was really unique. The point of view was really creative, and I feel like very different compared to other books I've been reading lately. That might be polarizing for some, and they might be turned off by it, but I could not recommend enough. Like, stick to it. The payoff by the end is well worth the struggle you might have in trying to recenter yourself. I did find myself kind of getting disorientated, and you kind of have to recenter yourself every chapter to figure out, okay, whose head am I in now, or what angle am I looking at, or I can't, it's so hard to talk about without giving spoilers. Spoiler free is hard for me, so bear with me. As far as themes go, themes of parenthood and motherhood and loss and time passing and the inevitability of death and leaving behind a lasting legacy and the work you put in. There's so layers and layers and layers of theme. Unrequited love is a big one in this one. All things you kind of come to expect with sci-fi, but there's, for some reason, the way that Simon Jimenez's prose was kind of linked together with this larger-than-life, mass-market genre science fiction story being told in this literary way just felt like two different worlds coming together in perfect harmony, which is ironic because there's a lot of music references in this book as well as bird references. For lovers of biology and astrophysics, you'll love this book, and for fans of just good character development, strong characters, you'll really dig this book. But I do feel like fans of science fiction in general will find it really hard not to enjoy themselves while they're reading this book. I find it very enjoyable to read. I was dreading finishing it, and the final moments were so intense. I think I paced my entire house the last 4 or 5 chapters listening to it. I couldn't sit down because it was so intense, and I was so worried about the ending, and I was so concerned for these characters, and I feel like that was just great testament to good writing and good character development. But in talking about like the X factor or what kind of stood out to me above other science fiction stories, honestly, wasn't just the prose or the excellent character development or the really unique world building, even though or lack thereof, it left a lot to imagination. For me, it was like the type of science fiction, the way the ships were just explained. They didn't just feel like your run-of-the-mill UFO or Millennium Falcons or Enterprises. The ship itself, all the ships in general, but the Debbie specifically, you spent a lot of time on. Felt very different than other science fiction ships that I've been a part of, where it had like sails. It almost reminded me a little bit of Treasure Planet ships. And there's something about it that gave me that found family vibe of all these strange different characters who have different roles on the ships, and you're spending, you know, small amounts of time with each one, moving across the ship and getting to meet them all. And you felt like you were on the ship, and I felt like that was the X factor for me. Was by the end of the book, I felt like I wanted to go back on the ship and spend more time with these people, and I felt like their long voyage was my long voyage. And there's something unique about that, as well as the way the narrative is presented to the reader and how the plot is structured. I can't say too much without giving it away, but it is very unconventional and well worth the struggle if you find yourself kind of getting caught up by it. Just power through it, because by the end, when you see the full picture, it is just truly spectacular. So let's talk about the final score for Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Which qualifies as a wicked good book on my scale. Really enjoyed it. Really excited about talking about it with other people. If you've read this book and you have thoughts about it, drop it down below in the comments. I'd love to discuss it with you. And yeah, just really special book to me. It became like an instant favorite of mine. And I'm looking forward to rereading it again with some friends. I think I talked to a friend of mine about she was going to pick it up this month. And I kind of want to follow along with her, because I'm going to pick up the paperback on the 26th, I think it comes out. I'll be definitely buying that in person so I can kind of go through it again. And yeah, this book surprisingly hit me in the feels as a parent myself. It checked all the right boxes for me as a science fiction fan, but it unexpectedly hit me as a parent in the same way that Finding Nemo does for some parents, where just like the relationship between these two characters that aren't necessarily blood related but become as close as blood. Really spoke to me, and it was done in a way that I hadn't seen before, and I found it really moving and really beautiful, and it definitely I did find myself tearing up a bit towards the end. It was a really beautiful story and a beautiful relationship, and I love the way it concluded. I was really nervous to see how he was going to wrap everything up, because there was so many loose ends going in different directions across massive stretches of space and time. And he wrapped that really nicely, so I was pretty happy with it. That's it for Vanished Birds. I'll put a link down below with a link to the book itself and the author's page. And again, if you've read this book or you're thinking about reading and want to talk about it, comment down below. As always, guys, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Stay wicked.